Open it for the city, and
Okay.
then I'll open it for the county.
Great.
How's that?
Well, welcome everybody. I want to thank and welcome our county commissioners for joining us and welcome you to City Hall, and then the team that's joined us from the county as well. The chairman and I both have to open meetings. I'm sorry that your name tags don't have your titles, so we'll get that fixed for next time. We know that you were commissioners. I'll do roll call ask the clerk to do roll call for the city, and then the chairman will do the same for the commission. And then after that, we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks, everybody. Clerk, will you call our roll?
Agent.
Here.
Clegg. Halliburton.
Here.
Willits.
Here.
Whittings. Here. 4 present.
Okay. All right. Well, we don't do a roll call. There's only 3 of us. But our clerk we need to have the official opening up. And today is Wednesday, the 25th. The time is 10 o'clock. The Board of Commissioners is in session and we're meeting with the city and the city council.
Great. So we are officially open. This is wonderful to have everybody together. We're trying to remember when this last happened. And I feel like the Councilmember Elaine Clegg and I were at a meeting with County Commission a long time ago. So we are happy to be having these conversations, figure out where we can collaborate on things where our residents from both the city and the county are involved, but also to have you here. We do joint meetings often with the County Commission. The chairman and I spend quite a bit of time with other mayors and county commissioners in the region, but to have this conversation on the river and then housing is a great one to start with our own collaborative meetings. So welcome. With that, I'm gonna, I think, hand it off to the team of folks here. With this presentation in particular, I'm gonna ask that we hear from all 3 folks on the information they have related to river management. And then after that, let's get in with questions and kind of a policy discussion amongst us, just so we make sure we're able to hear both from the city and the county before that conversation starts.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I checking to see if our slide presentation will come up. I think we have to.
There you go.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, Madam Mayor, council members, members of the commission, thank you. I'm Doug Holloway with our Parks and Recreation Department. Myself, Chief Niemeyer, and your Parks and Waterways Director, Scott Kohlberg, are here to talk about collaborative efforts that we have been working together on for the last several months in creating Chief Niemeyer.
What about the other way?
Okay, there we go. Well, we got it. See, if the chief just gets up and walks towards something, it starts working. It's public safety. Again, we've been working the last several months, commission members and council members, Madam Mayor, on how we can address some of the issues that continue to come up on the river. And one of the things I think we all recognize is this asset we have in the community is probably one of the most attractive things we have that folks like to do during the summertime. I think Director Kohlberg has mentioned they've done surveys in the parking lot of cars that are parked there, and they get literally license plates from just about every state in the United States. We do know that they're setting records every year for the number of folks that are floating the river. And so what comes with that are some challenges that we continue to work through. Ada County works through, our public safety folks work through, and us in Parks and Recreation as well. So one of the things we wanted to discuss with the council and the commission today, 3 main topic points that we believe we want to get out on the table to discuss. One is just the overall safety of the Boise River and the number of rescues and things that are occurring on the river that are requiring our public safety interaction. And Chief Niemeyer, again, will address some of that here in a moment. Also talk about communication. We think that's a major player in how we're collaborating with Ada County. We have a significant reach with our social media platforms. Ada County does as well. We haven't been the best in working together on how we utilize those resources with our public. And then just talk about escalating costs associated with how we manage the river. And again, some of that is in public safety, some of that is in Parks and Recreation, and also our Boise Police. So I'll kick this off before turning it over to Chief Niemeyer. Our role in this is primarily the takeout on the Boise River, which is at Ann Morrison. We also provide free parking at Ann Morrison. And again, working closely with Scott and his team, we've seen a significant increase in those that are parking at Ann Morrison, which is a good thing because that reduces the parking issue, not only at Barber Park, but also in the residential area around there. And again, Ada County Parks and Waterways has increased the number of shuttle services that are occurring in Ann Morrison. They've added more buses and added more times. And that has allowed for more folks to be able to park at Ann Morrison and then take the shuttle as opposed to parking out at Barber Park. Our custodial services this past year was about $9,700. And our forestry team works very closely with our fire department in identifying different hazards on the river at the beginning of the float season and then mitigating those hazards. We also take care of all the permitting with the state in our ability to be able to get onto the river and actually mitigate those hazards. And so our forestry team, we have about $11,200 that we spend annually on that. We also have the contract with the shuttle company that works with Ada County Parks and Waterways through Ann Morrison Park. And then we'll be the city lead, working very closely with Director Kohlberg's team and our fire department on being the lead in the communication and communication protocols from here on out through the summer float season. We don't have a rep from our Boise Police Department, but we have had significant conversations with them, as well as our parking control team through the city clerk's office. We do have a residential parking zone out in that Barber Park area. When you create a parking zone, a residential parking zone, what comes along with that is enforcement. So enforcement is conducted both by our parking control team as well as our Boise Police Department. We are looking at some point, whether it be this fiscal year budget build in 24 or in 25, I believe your parking enforcement team will be looking at adding some resources or requesting to add resources to continue to monitor that residential parking zone. And in conversations with our Boise Police Department, they estimate about 100 hours of overtime in managing the residential parking zone, which they put, it depends on the hourly rate for the officers that are managing that, but about $6,000 annually to enforce the parking in Southeast Boise. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Niemeyer, and he'll discuss not only some of the issues that the fire department is facing, but also some very exciting web-based opportunities to increase our communication with our floaters during the summertime. Chief?
Great. Thanks, Doug. Good morning, everyone. I've got about 7 slides, so I'm going to be efficient with my time. As the mayor alluded to, we want time for a conversation afterwards and get it over to Scott. So a little bit about costs. Hard cost for the 2022 float season was approximately $5,000, which doesn't sound like a lot. What drives that? 2 things. One, during the mitigation time when our crews are on the river mitigating, which is about 3 to 4 times a week prior to the float season, we will backfill that station. That station's on reserve. It's a very large geographical response area. So we'll backfill and bring a crew in so that they can cover the station that's out, or the crew that's out, that's on the river doing the mitigation effort. And then during the float season, typically on the weekends, as we saw this past year when it is really busy, and the crews are on the river for hours at a time doing rescues and getting people unstuck, we'll also bring a crew back in and just backfill that during that time that they're on the river. Once they're off the river, they're back in the station, we send the extra crew home. So those are some of the hard costs that we have. And then the other thing that we've seen, and it's a soft cost, but it is a service level issue, is with more time on the river due to mitigation and then response, like we saw last year, that does leave a pretty big void in a pretty big response district. That Station 1 responds to fires, EMS calls within that downtown core, but they also have all the foothills and the foothills rescues that are also going on congruently with the rivers. So that's some of the hard and soft costs that we have that we mitigate through every year. And then looking at last year, and I want to qualify the 400% because if I were you, I'd be looking at 400% increase and asking, how are you collecting your data? So two things that drove that. One, we were post-COVID for a float season, and we saw a tremendous amount of increase on the river. Is that the new norm? We don't know. We won't know until this year to compare it against last. The other thing that we did this year that we had not been doing in the past is when we respond to the river for a rescue, the crews would go out, effect the rescue, and then while on the river, have other people that were stranded or in trouble. In the past, we were never documenting those contacts. So it was literally one call for about 4 hours. This year, we actually did a good job of how many contacts do we have on the river while on the river in the face of a rescue call, and then we stayed on the river, quite honestly, because people continued to get hung up. Broadway Bridge was by far our biggest hang up as far as the floaters go. And really our crews were there most of the season when the flows were high, just affecting rescues, predominantly at the Broadway Bridge, but then upstream as well. We do the initial river sweep. That's depending on the flows. We work hand in hand with city and county parks, and then also other partners to know when we're going to get on the river to start that mitigation effort. The reason we go out 3 or 4 times a week is because as the flows continue to change, we have new hazards that drop into the river. And so we're really out there wanting to make sure that we clean it up as best we can before the floaters start coming down. We locate the permanent hazards, but then throughout the float season, especially as the flows are higher, we'll be on the river again 3 times a week, just looking at the new hazards that are dropping into the river and making sure we're cutting those out so that people don't get hung up on them. The thing that Doug mentioned that we're really excited about as we started having this dialogue about how do we better communicate, how do we better prepare the community as they're starting to float the river. We have a GIS data insight analyst, and she is not for hire. I just want to make that disclaimer. She is brilliant. And credit to us, Assistant Chief Romeo Gervais, who actually came up with this idea initially. Could we put something on a phone in an app type environment or a web-based environment that people can get information in real time? If you think about, as you travel around, this whole location services idea, they know where you are. And sometimes we don't want that, but sometimes we do, and they can map you to the right place. Taking that mentality, can we apply that to the river? And she has built an incredible platform. We're now collaborating with the county and other partners as we continue to build this out. I want to show it to you real quick. This is a rough, high-level idea. This has been built out so far, but it's going to be further built out. But you can see on the right-hand side, this is literally the phone that you're looking at. That's going to have these 4 main categories within it: an interactive map, a guided tour, current conditions, and then safety checklist. And this is bringing real-time information to the community before they float. They can do this ahead of time. They can do it on the river. We might find a few more iPhones in the river if we implement this, but this, we believe, is innovative. I've reached out to fire chiefs in communities like our size that have a river flowing through it, and nobody is doing this. So this is literally a first of its kind that we're very proud of, and I think it's going to be a really good benefit to the community. So the interactive map, you can see where the hazards are. We're going to be plotting those in real time. So our dive team members, our river rescue folks, as they go out and they identify hazards, they'll be updating this real time. So you'll have real time information on hazards. And those that we cleaned up, you'll have takeout points, drop-in points, et cetera, within this map. You go to the guided tour. This is literally where the location services happens. So as you're floating, if you're technology savvy, you can have a guided tour as you're floating through, and you can see what's coming up with instructions on how to navigate it. And again, that Broadway Bridge is the biggest challenge we had. If we can articulate to people how to navigate that passageway alone, we're going to have less rescues needed moving forward. The river condition reports, this is being built out, but this will just talk about the flows, some of the safety concerns with the current flows, temperatures, et cetera. And then lastly, a safety checklist. And the nice thing that they've built into this that I like is before you can even get to this, there's going to be an acknowledgement that you have to say, yes, I acknowledge, right? You see that all the time with different apps to say, yes, I acknowledge the dangers I'm about to face before you get to have all these cool features right to your phone. So there is an acknowledgement of what they're about to face as they go through. I said I wanted to be efficient. I think the mayor's called me the fastest talking director she has. So I will pass this over to Scott.
Madam Mayor, I do have a question though. I'll be quick. So incredible. I think this is going to be a wonderful resource for not only citizens who live here, but our visitors. I'm wondering if we could include any sort of transportation update, like how best to get to the river. You take the shuttle, or how many parking spaces there are available, just like we have at the airport, to help people plan so that we can reduce congestion and some of that overtime in the neighborhoods. Is that a possibility?
I would be shocked if it's not a possibility. Seeing what they've done so far with this, I can't imagine that they couldn't incorporate that in.
Well, we'll need to work with our partners at Ada County to do that, but I think that will help people plan because oftentimes I think they assume that when they go, that there's going to be, it's going to be easy peasy and then it's not. And then the overflow ends up in the neighborhoods and that's a distraction for the neighborhood and it costs us a lot of money
Right.
because of the police. So I'd love it if we could work together on the transportation piece.
I would think we can.
Thank you.
I didn't even follow my own rule. Let's fast forward through this slide. We're going to take questions at the end after we hear from the county, because I want to make sure that we've got to stick to time
Yep.
and I don't want to cut the county off. So we're going to hear from them.
Thank you. If I could get some assistance pulling my presentation up, that would be fantastic. Thank you. It's at the bottom there and it's really appreciate that. Not that one. The one on the far left, please. Nope. Yes. Yep. That's the one. All right. Thank you once again. I just want to express my appreciation to Madam Mayor and the city council members and the board of commissioners and my colleague here, Doug and Chief Niemeyer. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to talk about river safety. It's great to get the groups together, I think, to address some of these challenges. And I'll share some of those challenges that we're seeing with you and what we're committed to doing again this float season. It's no small task to run a float season in the valley these days, but we'll try to fly through a few slides and shed some light on things. I find it awesome that we do have a plan on the books. Boise City Council did adopt the Boise River Resource Management and Master Plan in 2014. It does set the tone and build the foundation for really these talks we're having here today. 4 key management areas were addressed in that plan. We're not going to get too deep into those, but there's public safety right at the top of the list. And just 3 quotes from the plan that really tee up where we are today. Cooperation with other agencies and creating partnerships are overarching strategies that apply to the recommendations in each of those 4 management areas. Recreationists and other river corridor users depend on signs, printed materials, and digital information for directions, rules, and event information. And then third and lastly, this is really kind of a Oracle style here, but BPR needs to, and BPR and BFD need to employ the expertise to build and maintain interactive sites. So you saw from Chief Niemeyer that tremendous app or platform that's going to be used this year, and I think that's really addresses it there. We're already doing that now. It's going to be great to use this year. There are 77 recommendations in that plan. This is one of them I think we're working on actively together as a partner. And that plan really kind of covers 10 miles between Eckert Road and Glenwood Bridge. We, as you all know, are focused on this segment here. This is 6 miles. So, I think for 9.5 months of the year, Barber Park and Ada County Park and Ann Morrison Park for 9.5 months are completely disconnected. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Ann Morrison Park for 9.5 months. He doesn't know what's happening in Barber Park for 9.5 months. But 2.5 months every year for probably the last 50 years, they're connected by this thread. There's a 6-mile thread between those two. And that 6 miles of Boise River is the designated novice floater segment. That's from that plan that was approved. That 6 miles includes 3 river-wide diversions, 9 bridges, including 4 Greenbelt specific bridges, several islands, multiple side channels. And so that's a lot of what this new platform or app I think is going to address is how do you navigate those? How do you safely navigate those between that thread that ties the 2 of us together? For reference, there's Boise City Hall and Ada County Courthouse. It's all in our backyard. It's all a stone's throw, but this is in terms of the 64 miles of the Boise River from Lucky Peak Dam to its confluence with the Snake near Parma, this 6 miles of Boise River absorbs the majority of recreation during the summer. For everybody that comes to the community, this 6 miles is really ground zero. If you'll indulge a little bit of humor real briefly, this is what it feels like when the float season opens. You'll see Doug and me in this quick, that's Doug on the left, that's me on the right.
Hi.
I'm taller.
Yeah, this is where we announce the float season. And then this is sort of the next 2.5 months of our lives in Barber Park and Ann Morrison Park.
Where's our police?
Well, good question. This is the Boise River, all the resources on the river. People just completely annihilate the Boise River for 2.5 months. And I think it's interesting, I'll stop here, but I think it's interesting to note that both the parks headquarters for Boise City and 80 counties headquarters are located in these parks. So they're literally on our doorsteps every day for 2.5 months, right in our backyards, in our front yards, where we operate our entire staff headquarters from. So on that upper end, that end of the thread that we're responsible for, Barber Park attempts to do a lot of things for those 9.5 months and does a lot of things for the community for 9.5 months. But much like Chief Niemeyer indicated, we do have to redeploy our staff, and we have service gaps in our other park properties that we then pull people in from offsite. Our Lucky Peak team we have 100 dock strings at Lucky Peak that we manage and build and maintain. We pull those people into Barber Park. Everybody knows we kind of reset our priorities for those 2.5 months. We pull people off the 11 miles of greenbelt we manage. We still try to redeploy seasonally, but we know that we kind of have to turn our attention to Barber. There's that event center. We actually shut down the event center for weekend bookings. So it's a significant kind of financial impact to our revenue because we can't coexist with an event center on weekend days in Barber Park with the float season. We learned that back in 2019. That was the first year we started to not host weekend events any longer. And all those great things that come with the float season. There's a lot of line management, queue management, crowd management, vehicle management, contract management. In Barber Park, just some photos showing a lot of those activities. And then traffic flow and parking is really critical. And to Chief Niemeyer and Doug's points, the popularity of this activity, to shed some light on that with data, we do have a parking kiosk. Yes, it does retain some revenue. However, that increase in revenue requires costs too. But let's talk real briefly about that increase. So the daily average visitation for me, this last 5 years is the best sample size because 2017 was a flood year and it compressed the float season. And there isn't good accurate data for a float season that starts on July 29th, like we did in 2017. But we have a 5-year sample size that includes a 2018 when people were chomping at the bit that didn't float in 2017. And then 2019 was, kind of a normal year. 2020 and 2021, COVID influenced years that we did actually have a full-blown season. But those 2 years we had to figure out, is it the new normal? Well, as a matter of fact, in 2022, the year after COVID, all those people that visited Boise or moved to Boise and stayed, that increased by 23% after that COVID year. So the number of daily average vehicles, which is a count that we collect on every day for the float season for the past 20 years, that increased 51% over the last 5 years and 23% in just that year over 2021 to 2022. So we're trying to absorb this massive increase in visitation. Imagine a school or movie theater, supermarket with that increase in 1 year. And you'll see what we're experiencing in the river, on the river, in both parks. We do pay for traffic parking assistance there. Now it's a pretty significant expense. We did begin that in 2019 for the first time, and that's consistent. Every weekend we hire 10 staff seasonally to work 6 hours, the most compressed hours that we experience the highest volume of visitors. Quick picture to show a couple of pictures. Don't focus on that giant and the size of that giant Pegasus unicorn necessarily, but on the right, you'll see this is a launch site at Barber Park. Well, one thing you'll notice is just about every piece of equipment is a pool toy made out of polyvinyl carbon. It's PVC, not suitable for a river environment, essentially not suitable for a moving body of water, let alone one with rocks, sticks, branches. But that's what we see every day, all day. Also, you'd be really hard pressed to find a life jacket in that photo. So those are the types of equipment we see a lot. That's part of the benefit, I think, of having a contractor that offers a more suitable material with Hypalon. NRCS and Moravia are two local companies from Idaho that do, build boats that are suitable for river environments. That's the rental inventory. And they come with life jackets and paddles and things. So at least offering somebody that shows up from Iowa, that says, I'm going to float the river for the first time. I've never been in a moving body of water. I picked up my box from Walgreens on the way over, and I have this double tube that has a cooler in the middle. Maybe they can second guess and decide, no, I think I'm going to rent something. It's more safe. But what happens with those pieces of equipment is we pick them up. They're pretty commonly deflating in the river. And part of that is failure due to the seams busting. They're not seams that are suitable for like a high pressure air compressor. There's seams that are not suitable for a river environment. They really don't work. They puncture all the time. Like I mentioned, I redeploy my crew from our waterways division and myself, and we do every couple of weeks, we'll go and pick up trash out of the river. And most of that it's not all White Claw cans, but there's a lot of cans and bottles. You get the sense for what's the drink of the season. And then you also pull a lot of rafts and tubes out of the river. We do monitor with our 24 camera NVR system we've had in the park for about 20 years. So we are monitoring flow and traffic and volume throughout the course of any single day. 9 cameras are dedicated just to float season operations. You can enlarge any of those and watch it live, watch it back if there's incidences of, graffiti or fights or, any of those things. And again, we too have these kind of crazy expenses, anymore. This is just the basic float season expenses. We do have a lot of soft costs, but for temporary staffing, we spend about $125,000 annually. That includes our long-term seasonal staff, 1 person for 32 weeks. We get them started really early. It's the longest we can hire a seasonal staff legally is 8 months. So we have 1 person that we hire for that. These are loaded rates too. We have 4 people that we hire for 14 weeks. Really, that's our summer maintenance staff. They start mid-June, end in mid-September. That's $43,000. Kiosk cashiers, we hire 3 of those for $23,655. And then weekend traffic and parking, that's a pretty significant expense for those 6 hours. 10 people for 12 weekends and holidays. Uniforms and supplies, we just want people to see us. So high-vis uniforms and supplies for the people that work in the park so they can see us and find us. Janitorial, Doug knows, toilet paper, hand soap, paper towels, garbage bags, batteries, cleaning, all that stuff. It's a lot more high volume. We also open a secondary set of restrooms during the season to adapt to the volume. And then park repair, there's always damage. Somebody always breaks something, rips a sink off the wall, or rips a soap dispenser off the wall, or does donuts in the parking field. And we have some expenses related to that. And then the event center, we lose about $55,000 by not booking those weekend days. So that revenue lost by, if we would have booked 27 events, that's kind of what that amounts to, is every weekend day plus the holidays. What we're trying to do for Barber Park is this. We're trying, if you'll look and see this time-lapse photo, or imagery, this is from August 20th of last year. Not a busy day, but you'll see over the course of this about 1.5 minutes, the flow of floaters on the right, you'll see as the day begins and there's more floaters and more floaters. And the way the parking field is being parked in the upper left-hand side, the drop-off circle in your foreground, our office is located right in the center there. You can see the event center towards the top of the screen. Our job every summer is to efficiently manage Barber Park, to get people in and out safely, efficiently, quickly, so that we don't retain people longer than they need to be retained and create peripheral sort of collateral damage in the neighborhood, so to speak, by absorbing as much as we can as efficiently as possible. It allows us to do the best job we can for the citizens that visit and the citizens that live near the park. So you'll see the parking field reaching capacity here in the upper left. On this particular day, we didn't have to do any temporary closures or anything along those lines. But we do park that full field. You'll see some as this progresses, some at the front. The vehicles will start to vacate as the shuttle buses come in and drop off the drivers for those vehicles, and then we'll repark those. You can see, if you really have an eagle eye, you'll see the bright shirts from our staff and MAV Event Services. But yep. And this is, sorry, Madam Mayor. So this is the final part of that. The things we'll be collaborating on and have been collaborating on, we'll continue to support development, promotion of Boise Fire's interactive tool. We'll participate, as we always do, in preseason hazardous debris meeting and recon. We'll coordinate the opening date announcement. Just point of note, June 20th is sort of a target now, and I think we'll talk about that more. We typically don't share and talk about that specific date. That's the day after Juneteenth. It's another holiday that's recognized now in the community. River flows will determine that, but that allows us to all have kind of a clear, clean target. The average opening date for the past 20 years is June 21st. So it's right on that average. We're happy to host an opening day media event with Ada County and Boise City leadership in Barber Park. We intend to have ongoing weekly at minimum communication with key interagency personnel throughout the season. We did install life jacket loaner stations in Barber Park as an additional benefit for those that may not have them. Ongoing river trash removal like we do, ongoing efficiency for crowd traffic line management like we do in park safety. We will have a last resort hand operated barrel pumps and other outlets for those that do not have a pump. Outlets have always been available, but we're going to offer some strategically placed barrel pumps for hand pumping for those that won't be a key feature of the park or a key amenity that's advertised, but it'll be a last resort. We also have talked about additional safety and garbage signage with QR codes and consistency with Boise City Parks, outreach, whatever you guys would like to post. We're happy to post in Ada County's Barber Park. We'd love to support ACHE efforts, to your point, Councilmember Willetts, regarding Eckert Bridge safety, signage, exterior traffic parking. We're happy to support and collaborate what ACHD undertakes with that. We are going to also offer extended hours of operation for the rentals and shuttle, trying to disperse that volume of those massive amounts of people over a longer period throughout the course of the day. And then we're trying to reduce the volume of folks that choose to visit on a Saturday or Sunday. I tell everybody that I love or care about, don't come to the park on Saturday or Sunday, come on Tuesday or Wednesday. So those 2 days are going to be offered as discounted rate days to try to disperse that volume from the weekends onto a less busy days. Life jacket loaner stations install. We do, and happy to continue to post on that. We'll use that Float the Boise River Facebook page again to supplement and communicate. But again, we'll be taking the kind of cues from Boise City this year. We consistently have posted videos that get really good reactions from Boise Fire and Boise Police, and things about river jumping and don't jump on people and trees falling in and things like that. So, and Doug mentioned that's all those things. Yep.
Madam Mayor, first, it's good to finally be in the room with Mr. Coburg. We've talked a lot on Zoom, I think, during COVID about this. And in this, I guess in the spirit of trying to move it along, Madam Mayor, I was thinking about this meeting and the conversation we're going to have. And rather than float some suggestions and see how you think, I'm just going to make the suggestions and see what you think. What I heard today was the use of the river has changed since COVID. The 5-year data period that you have indicates a lot more people, a lot more trash, a lot more cars. And what I heard from you was a lot more expense being present on the river, taking care of things. So the first sort of suggestion I have to kick things off is, as we're both entities are managing the river at a busier and busier time, we might talk about a joint funding model. I think both sides have some complaints. There's sinks being ripped off, or there's added enforcement issues. We might just talk about a way to jointly fund the mitigation efforts that come with the wonderful amenity of the river. And then the second suggestion I had, or something worth thinking about, is we have really similar sets of issues in the foothills with, heavy use, lots of people managing things like trash or protecting the trails. And we have a consortium of dedicated volunteers and park staff in the Ridge to Rivers program that helps a lot to keep that running well. And so I wonder if, a Barber to Morrison program like Ridge to Rivers, or, the Sweet 6 Miles, or whatever we want to call it, but a consortium like that of community-minded people who would be interested in helping take trash out of the river, would be interested in collaborating and help us, frankly, solve some of these problems and manage some of the burden. So those are my two suggestions to kick it off. Should we talk about jointly funding the mitigation efforts? Because right now we're bearing some, you're bearing some. And should we talk about creating some type of community-oriented Ridge to River style consortium to help both of our agencies manage the river? Because I don't think, the final point, I guess, is I think we all agree that it's pretty awesome that everybody loves to float the river every year. And what we don't want to end up doing is running into problems that cause us to try to do things like limit the resource or prevent people from coming or things like that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bajan, appreciate the suggestion. I think there's some really good ideas there. I think the other issue to be working jointly is what's being floated down the river. Every single time I ride home at the end of the day, it looks like a group of unicorns have been murdered at the takeout. And it's crazy what people float down. And Parks has done such a great job at now putting like a full-size trailer that can be hooked up and pulled away, and it's still overflowing every single weekend. And so I guess that's where I would like to see the other joint effort, is how we're really communicating what's allowed to be on the river or not allowed to be on the river. And I don't know how that can be regulated, whether it's the types of pumps that are put out there or messaging or education. But the things that people are floating down, I have to believe have something to do with the reason they need to be rescued as well, because you can't paddle an air mattress, around a variety of other things. And so I guess that's the other area that I would really like to explore is how do we actually regulate or educate or reduce the amount of terrible things that people are floating down the river on.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, everyone. I, like Councilmember Bajent, have been involved in this for a very long time. So it's nice to see that there's been so much progress made. I just have a couple of questions. One of the things that you mentioned, Chief Niemeyer, were the Broadway Bridge pilings and how those are such a hazard. I know the Broadway Bridge is new-ish. Do you think that there are any engineering opportunities to maybe, I don't know, do something to the base of the pilings to make them a little bit safer? Is there a potential collaboration there with like ACHD, or I think it might be Idaho Transportation Department?
Council President Woodings, we have had some initial conversations with IDT, even if it's building, right now those pylons are round, if there's a diversion there. One of the challenges we have too, and as both Doug and Scott know, every year that channel changes just a little bit depending on the flow. So one year it might be to the left, one year it might be to the right that we're having challenges, but we have had some initial conversations with ITD just about those pylons specifically, and can something be done there?
Great, that's awesome. And then my next question, Scott, you went over what the expenses are at the park and kind of the associated expenses with the floating season. What is your average annual revenue from parking and how do those compare?
Yeah, so council member or council president, yes. So the parking parking fees we collect is essentially almost the exact same as what all those basic costs that I mentioned are. So parking is just over $200,000, $7 per vehicle. Last year it was just over $200,000. The total of those costs that I show on that basic expense sheet was, I think it was 190 or something, $190,000. With the contract that we have with the vendor, I don't have the number offhand. It's a contract that is retained the same, basically a vendor service contract, usage of the facility in 3 installments plus a revenue target. We retain 20% of anything over $200,000 that's made over the course of a season, plus 3 installments of $25,000. So at a base, it would be $75,000. I don't have last year's revenue figures for that, unfortunately. And I will note, the Department of Parks and Waterways is funded, not via 100% general fund dollars. So a significant portion of what my department does spend in the community, like for a greenbelt repair project, for instance, does come from outside revenue, utilizing, basically leveraging taxpayer dollars with some general fund dollars, bringing in revenues and putting those back in the local community. And so in any given year, my budget to the Board of Commissioners may include up to 35% of our entire budget. It comes from revenue generated in Barber Park, event center included throughout those 9.5 months.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Sure. I think this is a great time for us all to get together. I'd like to first find out how many people have actually floated the river in the last 2 years. Some haven't. Some haven't. I think that we should all at least check out the improved amenities at Barber Park. We've improved that park significantly over the last 2 years. The entrance to the river has been really improved. We've changed the parking area, the sidewalks. We even put a new fishing pier out there. We've improved it a lot. So I'd recommend that we all at least spend a little bit. If you don't want to float the river, at least come to the park and experience the park. Okay. And then we'll have a better handle on actually how we can improve it and how we can deal with the community. But I think we've got the start going for a good collaboration to improve for the whole community. I don't know if you noticed, but the thing that struck me on the map was when you're floating the Boise River, you're going through an urban area, but you don't know it when you're floating the river. it's like you're in the wilderness. You can see the mountains and so forth, but you can't see a lot of the housing, but you can some of it. But and I think that's part of the attraction of the Boise River is we float through an urban area, but you don't know you're floating through an urban area. It looks like you're floating in some of the wilderness. It's a wonderful amenity, and I think we can do whatever we can to enhance it.
I was gonna see if the council member wanted to pick back up his questions of council and the commission related to the two proposals you had.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'm certainly mindful of the time as well.
Steve ceded 5 minutes of his time, so he gets 10 minutes, and we can add 5 minutes to this if we need to, so we can go until 50.
Fair enough. If the council is open to it and the commissioners are open to it, I guess what I'd like to do would be provide direction to our staff to look hard at the cost associated with what we're doing, both fire, police enforcement costs, because there really have been some pretty significant burdens to us, frankly, both in policing what I would call poor behavior in the neighborhoods around Barber Park, which is a set of big logistical challenges because it's actually very far from the rest of our city. So we take officers out there. It creates real issues. And I know from conversations with Scott a couple of years ago and what he presented today that there are costs and burdens on the county as well. And so I would like to direct our staff to work together to get clear on the current costs we're absorbing, both agencies, both entities, and what we need to do to jointly fund or jointly make sure that we're taking care of them in the most efficient way. Because if we don't do that, and the county is bearing costs and the city is bearing costs, and we're not kind of hand in hand making sure that it's all efficient, we will do a bad job at it. Like two government entities trying to cover costs and not working together, it will be inefficient. And so I'd like to tie that together both for fiscal management reasons and to make sure that everybody feels that they're contributing fairly to the downside. And then I'm really intrigued by this, by a Ridge to Rivers type idea for getting the community involved. And so I'd like to hear more from Doug, who certainly knows a lot more about that than I do, and from anybody at the county who may have a perspective on whether that would work.
If I could enter it, I think we have a good working group already of our staff, and I think we can encourage our staffs, collective staff, to work together to at least make some proposals to the various governing bodies. I think that would be a good thing to do because we've been meeting together, and I think we can continue that.
Madam Mayor, I love that idea. And one of the reasons why, as Commissioner Beck said, the Boise River feels like you're in the wilderness as you're going through the middle of a city is because of organizations like Idaho Rivers United, who have worked tirelessly over decades to make it that way, instead of having it be an urban river that is concrete on the sides and becomes more like a channel like we see in a lot of other cities, right? So I think that collaboration model could work really well because I know that we have community organizations who are already heavily invested in keeping our river as wild as it can be and still be an urban river, which creates hazards for floaters, which creates needs for rescue. And so it feels like there's a really interested group of folks who could be brought together in that effort. And I think that's a great idea.
Madam Mayor. I feel like our river and the float is such an incredible amenity for the community, and it's only getting more popular. So I certainly think it's worthy of more investment to plan for the future and keep it operating as such a great amenity. I have dreams where somewhere maybe in the far future, the recreation is extended all the way to the Expo Idaho to, join up with our new park that we're installing down there. But I am, certainly interested in hearing about collaborative opportunities with the city of Boise and working towards more comprehensive management so that we can continually improve. And obviously safety is a big concern, and we got to keep our eye on that, especially with there's a recent injury with somebody jumping off the bridge. It's been in the newspaper, and we want to prevent things like that. But and I certainly would like to explore tapping the community, volunteers. I think there'd probably be no shortage of people if we could point them in the right direction to help assist the county and the city in keeping the river safe and fun for everybody.
Madam Mayor, Commission members, Councilmember Bajent, we'd be happy, Madam Mayor, to work closely with Ada County from a staff level to look at that, how the Ridge to Rivers model. Scott's very familiar with it because Ada County is our largest contributor to the Ridge to Rivers Consortium presently. And in best practices that we've looked at other similar communities around the country that have a similar river system as ours, they do have a similar collaboration in place. And that was the first light that came off of us with us, is that this is similar to what we do with Ridge to Rivers. And so the consortium is successful. And it isn't just Ada County and City of Boise. This would include other stakeholders within the river corridor that would be part of that consortium. So we're happy to take the lead with Ada County in looking at how that model would apply to the Boise River per any direction from you, Madam Mayor, commissioners, and council members.
Well, if I could jump in, I'm seeing consensus that both county and city staff ought to work together to come up with some proposals for us as decision makers to weigh regarding a joint funding model. Appreciate that suggestion. And also interest in seeing whether or not or how a Ridge to Rivers model would be feasible in terms of managing this really special corridor. Interesting idea to have it go all the way down to Expo, Idaho. I'm not familiar with that part of the river, so I don't know if that's even possible, to be honest, with the dams and stuff that are there. But, one thing is certain is that Boiseans, I think you said 46 states visited, but Boiseans love this. It's been something, maybe it has been 50 years. It's hard to imagine that. For the 25 years that I've been floating the river, it's gotten busier and busier. But it's both the experience, as you reference, of just feeling as if you've removed yourself from the busy of a city. But I think that concentrated time that we end up getting with family and loved ones in a very removed way, I'm so close to home, that keeps bringing people back. At least that's what I hear from residents. That's why my family loves spending time on the water. But there are real costs that in order for us, I think, to be able to continue to make this possible for families today and families tomorrow, coming to terms with and understanding the public safety costs, the cleanup costs, the management costs is key, so that we can make sure that this is either paying for itself to both entities to save taxpayers dollars, or that we're clear, really clear on the costs and making that decision, and that it's something that taxpayers ought to foot for everybody else. So having this information, I believe, will help us manage and improve the experience for so many folks that love to jump on that cool river and float down on the hot days of summer. So thank you. And thanks for your extra time. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're hearing from you, right, Steve?
Can I do it from here?
Yeah. Did you want to say anything to tee it up?
No, go ahead.
All right.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank you and the commissioners, council members, commissioners, mayor, for the work you've all done with emergency rental assistance and emergency rental assistance too, with our partner in the back there, Deanna Watson, and your fine staff. You've done amazing things with the money that the federal government sent us. So, and that work continues. This is a part and parcel of that. In terms of table setting, I'm here to talk about emergency rental assistance too. And as you likely know, emergency rental assistance to the program allows us to reserve our last 25% of those funds for, among other things, other affordable rental housing. And just to kind of quantify that for you, Ada County received 9.6 plus 10 from the Idaho Housing and Finance, which puts our 25% at 4.9. The city, as you know, received 8.7 in ERA 2 funds, and again, 10 million from Idaho Housing and Finance. So that puts your 25% at 4.6. So what can we use those funds for? The board asked me this question, and I told them this information. You can construct or rehabilitate or preserve affordable housing. It's got to serve very low income families. Similarly, you can use those funds to operate the affordable rental housing for very low income families that you have purchased, renovated, saved using those funds. what are very low income families? This is a substantial need in the Ada County area. It's 50% of area median income. So it's really those hard to get to folks. I put here the annual income limits for single, 2-person families and 4-person families. ERA 2 guidance requires that they be legally, that whatever you build, buy, renovate, rehab, that it be legally enforceable for a period of 20 years. In addition, there are a list of federal programs that you can align with and partner with. You can use funds like low-income tax, housing tax credits. The other one that I'm thinking of now is the Home Investment Partnership, and there's others that probably Maureen Baker or Maureen Brewer could explain to me. This isn't my native tongue, by the way. Housing. So those are the program guidelines. You can use it for affordable rental housing. It's got to be for very low income. There are deadlines. We have to have it committed, presumably by contract or obligated by September of 25, and then within 120 days or January of 26, you have to have that money expended. So the timeline's kind of fairly truncated. So the pitch is Ada County would really appreciate the city doing the same. The commissioners have kind of spoke unequivocally that they want to reserve that last 25% and use that funding to do something lasting in our community. And again, at the very low income level, it's a need, certainly a need. And it would dovetail nicely with the efforts you all are making in the affordable housing space. So initially, we were having some conversations about some recovery housing in the Allenbaugh area. To put up a significant size building that property probably deserves, because it's almost an acre. It's a pretty tough turn with the timelines. But we're not going to give up on the recovery housing. I think that'll be an element we can continue to discuss, whether that is a single site or maybe scattered site, small, maybe it's a duplex, or maybe it's a fourplex, and that's in some proximity to Allenbaugh, and the Housing Authority earmarks those for folks who are coming out of Allenbaugh and need some assistance with housing, maybe with a voucher. We've talked about constructing just right up the gut affordable housing, rental housing for very low income family housing, which would be, again, low income tax credits or something like that, or purchasing and rehabilitating affordable housing in kind of, again, that go buy rental and housing stock. And commit it to that use going forward for, obviously at least 20 years, but probably we would partner with our housing authority friends and it would be permanent, and we could do that all over the county. So what's next for us? Again, we're going to continue to look for partners. We'd love to have you join us. Your $4.6 million would be a substantial assistance. And I would love to work with your staff. They are exceptional. And we're going to continue to learn about recovery housing. We have more questions than answers about how it works and the different models that are out there. And we plan to talk to other agencies and organizations that may have an interest in this space. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Madam Mayor, I don't have any questions yet, but I likely will in coming days as I'm able to kind of stew on this a little bit. Just fantastic, though, that you're thinking about recovery housing. That's one of the things we hear a lot from many of our community partners, is that once somebody goes into Allenbaugh House, they've recovered from whatever addiction issues they're having, they're then released back into, temporary shelter, and they relapse. And so that's a really great way to help people have lasting recovery as they look for more permanent housing, and really forward thinking. So thank you.
Madam Mayor, quick response if I could. Sorry, Chairman Beck. Very important, I agree. And Heidi Hart and Deanna Watson and Maureen and I have been, tumbling this idea for probably 6 or 8 months. And there's, it's a little unwieldy because it could mean a lot of different things. And so we hope that kind of big building on site there at Allenbaugh or number of smaller buildings can be done. It's just going to take some time. There's a lot of partners involved. And again, we don't really know what that is yet. We've got some exploration and some information together before we know what kind of models might work here next to Allenbaugh House.
Well, I might add, Council President, that this is, that's what our initial thoughts were. We could do some sort of a building there, particularly if we get the city to join with us, but the timeframes just don't work because it's going to take longer. We'll have to get a conditional use permit and all kinds of things to change the use of that property. And so we've moved on to something else, but our idea is we're going to get a little under $5 million. We think we can make that an enduring benefit to the community instead of just a temporary benefit. And that's why we're trying to use that for that. We're looking for partners. So.
So just a clarifying question, because the chairman of the commission and I've had these conversations. It sounds, did I hear correctly though, that the interest in detox recovery housing that you have doesn't fit from a timeline perspective with the use of the ERAP funds? However, you'd still like to look at ways to ensure that we meet that service need to the community in the long run?
Yes, we would like, we're going to continue to look at partnerships for that home, for that area, but it doesn't seem like we have enough time to get it done within the time constraints of the federal treasury.
Okay, great. One thing that I've said to the chairman, so I'll say just to everybody here, is that we're really interested in figuring out how we partner to meet community need and how we pool resources or use resources in different ways based on, our own responsibilities or, governments. But in this instance, one of the things that I had asked the chairman was, does it matter if it's ERAP money? I mean, you'll hear from our staff very soon, our own housing strategies and the amount of money that this council has been willing to set aside to fund housing partnerships or to fund housing for Boiseans, super low income levels and others, in seeking partnership to do the work together. So, I look at this ERAP money, unless we're going to lose some, I want to make sure that we're careful not to create a cliff or a larger need sooner than will come otherwise as we seek to kind of prepare for that cliff. But this council has set aside millions of dollars reflecting their priority to build those partnerships and meet others' investments in meeting some of the needs that you're proposing here.
Good.
So that's the question. Like it's, I just want to be clear, certain that I understand. You're seeing ERAP as one of those solutions, but really what you're looking for is funding partnership and investment to meet some of the housing needs that we have in the region.
Yes, that
Great.
ERAP is a start because we can start out with approximately $5 million.
Great.
That's a start.
I think that's a great way to source funds for this for the county. If that's as you've looked at your budget, that's a feasibility. Any other comments? I think that some of what our staff will share will kind of dovetail really well into this request that we partner, but Councilmember Regent.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, just to add to what you said, which I think really does reflect the sentiments of the council. I think the council, certainly myself, would also agree that addiction recovery is a pressing and serious need in our community. And it's one that we don't focus on or talk about as much in that, we talk about the housing conversation and addiction recovery is a really big part of that. And so just to underscore what the mayor said, this council member takes that seriously as a need. And I think the rest of us probably do as well.
Well, I might add that is for some reason during COVID, the amount of homeless people going into Allenbaugh House actually went down a little bit. It was about half of the population was homeless prior to COVID, went down to about 39% during the COVID thing. And we don't know why, but that's what happened. And the homeless people that go in there, they end up, because they can only stay, 7 or 8 days, something like that, and then to go back to being homeless. And they really need a transition period. And if we could provide some sort of a transition period to get them trained, to get them to where they can be on their own, that would be a large benefit to the community, I think. And you're right, that is a real problem. And by the way, in that regard, we had a drug court graduation last night, and it was, if you've never been to one of those, I'd invite you to come to that. I mean, it is really we had 15 people graduated, and our hearing room was cram packed full of people. All those people had that largest support group, cram packed full of people, and we heard some really heartwarming stories of people that were. In fact, on the final graduation, they show their picture when they were arrested, and then they show the picture now, and there's a huge difference. We're changing lives with that drug court, and we could do the same thing with the transition center.
Yeah. All right, well, let's jump right in. Oh, sorry, go ahead. And then why don't you all come up so we can get started?
I'll just add, I'm not a big fan of incarceration as a solution to, drug addiction problems or mental health. Our Ada County Jail, the vast majority of people are in there have mental health or drug addiction problems. So I'm supportive of, working together to find solutions on the treatment level for the drug addiction problems we have in the Valley. We're expanding our drug court program. We purchased a new building on Elder Street to move the program out there and expand that. We've also invested some additional money in Terry Riley for mental health. And so I think, the mantra that we all have is, hey, we don't want to turn into Seattle or Portland. And that's generally with regards to the homeless problem. Homeless problem is mental illness and drug addiction. And I think if we learn the lessons from the past that incarceration is not the solution to this, then that will help us not develop those same types of problems that these big cities have. Thanks.
Just one last thought.
Mhm.
I just want to go back to, I think, what was the kind of purpose of Steve's presentation. So you're saying you have some ERAP dollars that you would like to deploy for very affordable housing for families, which is such a huge piece of our strategy too. It feels like, and I'm sure that you've been working really collaboratively with our staff on this. It's such a focus of ours that it seems like there's some really great opportunities likely that we've been working on that we would love your partnership with. And Nikki is sitting here in front of us, and I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Davidson, but I'm going to change that narrative a little bit because we know through a lot of research that homelessness and the increase in homelessness is really an issue of housing availability. There's not a lot of correlation with mental health, with addiction, but there is correlation with housing availability and the amount of inventory that we have for available housing. So a lot of our strategy has been increase housing stock for that reason. So I'll stop talking, but just wanted to point that out. And I know that Nikki's really familiar with that too. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor, Chairman Beck, Commissioners, Council members. For the record, Nikki Olivier Hellenkamp. I work for the City of Boise as a housing advisor in the Mayor's office, and I'm here to bring you an overview of our housing strategy update with a particular focus on permanent supportive housing in our area. And just want to reiterate, like all of you have already said, that we're really grateful to be having this conversation with the city and county together so that we can share more about the work each of us are doing and understand where there may be potential for collaboration and coordination. So certainly appreciate getting to go after Steve. In terms of quick agenda, I promise this won't take as long as it looks like it will, but just wanted a roadmap for where we're going. Quick overview of the spectrum of housing need and the city's strategy for housing investment, as well as the city's goals. And then a status update on where we are in terms of the production of new units and permanent supportive housing specifically, and just some quick next steps. So this graphic shows a spectrum of housing needs in our community broken up into segments that represent various ranges of area median income. So on the far left, you've got 0 to 30% of the area median income, 30 to 60, 60 to 80, and so on. It is inclusive of all housing types, everything from emergency shelter to affordable rental to market rate high-end homes. It is inclusive of rental housing and homeownership options. And for households who are above the area median income, over on the kind of dark blue segment of the graphic, it's typically not as much of a struggle to find market rate housing that is affordable to that household. It's really the incomes that are fall below that median income level who may have a more challenging or sometimes frankly impossible time finding housing that they can actually afford, meaning that it costs no more than 30% of their income. The city of Boise's 2021 housing needs analysis showed that the bulk of the unmet housing need in Boise was for households making 60% of the area median income or less. So those two far left segments. And just for context, for a typical Boise household in the 60% AMI range, you're talking about an affordable rent of no more than $1,100 a month. For that 30% AMI range, an affordable rent would need to be no more than $570 a month for a typical 3-person Boise household. And these are just rent levels that are extremely hard to achieve in the market. In December, Zillow's observed rent index reported that the median rent being advertised in the Boise MSA was $1,750 a month, which is obviously significantly more than that. And that data is only units that are being advertised on Zillow. It's imperfect and incomplete, but it is an important indicator of where housing costs are at in our community. Within that 0 to 30% slice of the image is a subset of housing need, which is permanent supportive housing. And permanent supportive housing provides both housing and supportive services to households who are frequently transitioning out of homelessness. Examples of the kinds of services provided include recovery coaching, case management, counseling, as well as behavioral health services. And it's worth noting that many households in that 0 to 30% AMI range don't actually need supportive services. They just need a place they can actually afford to live. But for some of those households, the combination of housing and supportive services is key to ensuring that they can maintain their housing long-term. And I think that fits well with some of the conversation we've already had. Put simply, our strategy for addressing the housing needs of our community is to focus deeply where the market doesn't, specifically on housing at price points where a typical developer or property owner would likely not be willing to, or in many cases, even financially able to focus, right? When we're talking about rents for households in that 30% AMI range, those rents are frequently not enough to even cover the cost of operating that building. So there's no market solution to that because there's no financial reason to operate a building at that low of rents. So in those kinds of cases, that's where some kind of subsidy is needed in order to make those projects possible. In terms of the city's housing goals, they're to produce 1,250 units affordable at 60% AMI and below. So again, focused on those two far left segments of the graphic over the next 5 years. We also have a preservation goal to preserve 1,000 affordable homes, wanting to hold on to the affordable housing stock we do have. And then we also have a permanent supportive housing goal of 250 units of permanent supportive housing. To that end, as the mayor mentioned earlier, the mayor and council have invested $45 million to date. That's a combination of general funds and federal pass-through ARPA dollars, which will be used to leverage significant additional funds from other sources, which Steve alluded to as well. And we have a number of strategies we're pursuing to work toward those goals. I'm going to highlight just a couple of them for you. So one of the strategies is to use city-owned land and funds to facilitate the production of affordable homes. It's important here again to note that the city's contributions to these projects represent actually a relatively small percentage of the overall funding for them. By contributing our funding, we're leveraging a variety of other fund sources, such as the federal low-income housing tax credit, in order to make it possible for these projects to move forward. An example, a recently completed affordable housing building cost $15 million. The city of Boise's contribution of $1.5 million made it possible for that capital stack to be completed and for the project to actually be built. So really looking at partnership is just absolutely necessary and key at every step here. In terms of an update, we have 47 units that were completed in 2022. The bulk of those at a building, the Thomas Logan, located right in downtown Boise. And the other two were actually two single-family homes, the Taft homes, that were built on land donated by Collister United Methodist Church. So another great example of partnership and collaboration between a faith community, a number of funders, including the city. Coming this year in 2023, we expect to have over 200 units come onto the market. The bulk of those are in Moda Franklin, which is at Franklin and Orchard. And in the pipeline in total, including the 200 this year and the 47 last year, 1,200 units projected to be completed by 2026. Some of the projects that will go toward that unit count are at State and Arthur, Fire Station 5, and Capitol Campus. Also worth noting that we are working in partnership with CCDC to bring on another 265 units targeted for slightly higher incomes. In terms of an update on the permanent supportive housing side, of that 1,200 unit pipeline that I mentioned, 200 of those units are going to be permanent supportive housing. And these are more deeply affordable. And as I said, they provide supportive services on site. We do have 67 units of permanent supportive housing in our community currently. That's at New Path and Valor Point. So the additional 200 units is a significant increase and responding to an urgent need in our community. In addition, our Path Home is working with developers to voluntarily dedicate units in existing buildings and some that are in pre-development. And there are 46 units that have been voluntarily dedicated by folks in our community who know that this is a need and want to be part of the solution. I think it's worth noting that we can focus on housing instability and an emergency response to housing stability and homelessness. But if we don't have a plan for housing for folks at a price they can actually afford when they're transitioning out of homelessness, we risk a situation in which many people remain in shelter for the long term with no exit strategy in place, right? And so a lot of what this is trying to do is to create a place for people to transition to, because in our market right now, there is just such little inventory that would be affordable to somebody who has a very low income. So trying to create some of that inventory and make that transition possible. On the flip side, when we focus on affordable housing, it's a long-term solution. These units, they won't come online for years, right? And so in the meantime, if we don't have resources to address housing instability, to address homelessness, while we wait for these units, we risk an increase in unsheltered homelessness. So really needing to make sure that both of those responses are appropriately scaled and that we're thinking about how we do that. In terms of next steps, the city will be continuing toward goals for production, preservation, and permanent supportive housing. And as I said, the only way we do that is through partnership. And so again, really looking for ways where we can partner and collaborate on funding with agencies like the county so that we can collaborate or coordinate on funding separate needs to address short, medium, and long term. So really appreciate Steve's comments and everyone else's, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Nikki. I'd like to jump in. Go ahead.
I just had a general question or comment. Thank you, Nikki, first of all. And I agree with Commissioner Davidson about, making sure that there's lots of options for folks, particularly those who are struggling with mental health and substance abuse. I think one of the things that I'd like to talk about as a county with the city is how we support families, because these are families that don't want to go into a shelter. They're probably living in their car. So they're not the people that we see often. They're not the people on the street. They are trying to make it work. And I think we as a community need to think about how we best support them, because these are children that are in school. We want them to do well. We want them to learn to read. We want them to be on a trajectory for success. So how do we help them become self-sufficient? And I think families is a gap that people often don't think about because they're not really seeing it. So any sort of discussion that we could have about families, I think would help benefit everyone in our community.
I wonder if Nikki wouldn't be able to jump in kind of pinpointing where families are part of this, because you have great points, council member, and I share that desire. I mean, one of the things that's really think neat about this is the numbers that you presented from Our Path Home, where they're asking. So I should back up and say that all of this is only possible with public-private partnership. And so while the county has, the council, excuse me, has invested funds, it is important to point out, as you did, that for that $1.5 million that we invested, another $15 million came to the table. And so we are that gap financing as we're thinking about how we partner with the funds that you have to use to meet this need with long-term solutions and the funds that we have. On the family piece, in Nikki's presentation, the Our Path homework is the campaign to end family homelessness, seeking partnership with builders of apartment buildings to dedicate units to get families permanently housed in ways that make it possible for those kids to go the same place every day, to be able to head to the same school every day, and to have that predictability and security that's necessary for them to thrive. And in the permanent supportive housing units that we're looking at, we are very in tune to the fact that for the last 2-3 years now, we've had families that had previously been in shelter that have made homes, if you will, in a hotel that has been funded through various agencies. And we need to bridge that while we work on the long-term solution, ideally in partnership, of housing for these families. And so I'd love to hear is what, just like the council member said, from others about that piece and whether or not there's something there that we can work together on. I'm recognizing that there's an immediate short-term need to keep these folks housed and a desire to meet the long-term solutions to provide stability for families.
Madam Mayor, I didn't know if Nikki was going to jump in or if you were asking for Nikki to talk more, but I do. So if you do, please go ahead.
Sure. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, I was just going to respond to one piece of what you said, Councilmember Willetts, which I think is really important. Going back to the city's housing strategy, be to focus where the market doesn't or can't. One of the things that we see in terms of family homelessness as a challenge is unit size, right? If you look at what's coming onto the market, what makes the most financial sense if you're a builder is to build 1 and 2 bedroom units. The way that the rent structures work, it just makes more sense. And so, I had a conversation with one of our affordable housing developers this week who talked about that need for 3-bedroom units, for units that are large enough for families, as being something that it might not make market sense, but that's why we focus on these types of affordable housing developments where we can bring some product to bear that is needed, but wouldn't otherwise be possible.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, just a couple of things that I would add. One of the things that I've learned since I've been on council, especially with housing and homelessness, it's such a big puzzle, and there's all these different puzzle pieces that you kind of have to put together. And it seems like, one of the opportunities is this long-term partnership that we're really working together and leveraging funds that we have now or that we may have in the future to address some of these issues, as well as funds that are available right now that we need to use sooner than later. And it seems like that there are some opportunities with some of those funds, and correct me if I'm wrong, to address some supportive services that could be provided and things that might be in the pipeline. Was that correct? It seemed like there was a list of different things that we could use for the funds. And one of the things was potential.
I'd have to investigate that a little bit. I know operations is, and I don't know what's included in operations, but it's possible.
Because I guess just one of the things that I'm wondering is that as we create these long-term strategies and we have so many projects in the pipeline, and some of these projects are for families, 200 units in the pipeline that we've got, many of them are for families. Many of them need supportive services related to recovery. And so if we can't figure out a way to use this ERAP funding immediately for Allenbaugh House, there's potential for long-term partnership there in the future, but then also potential for partnership with one of those funds to be leveraged some of the work that's already being done. So it just seems like there's such a great short-term, what are we going to do with this funding strategy that also kind of builds on the long-term aspect of what we're trying to do as well. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just trying to figure out how we can make sure that we're really looking at the different puzzle pieces that we may need to address right now, so that we can kind of, put together the rest in the future.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Just make a comment. I think it's important here, just like it's important for, like was said, like Chairman Beck said. I visited that court graduation last night as well. And I think transition was the key component part. And transition is not only what's going on now, but what provides the support mechanism into the future. And when you indicated it, I wrote down here, permanent support. That I don't think we need to focus on permanent support. We need to focus on permanent transition, not permanent support. I think that's important in the component part of it is we need to look for housing, but permanent transitional mechanisms for getting people where they need to go. Back to what the councilwoman said as well. Families, focus on families transitioning into supporting themselves. That's the mechanisms we need to look for, not permanent support of them over the long term.
Sure, Madam Mayor, Commissioner, thank you for that comment.
Actually, I think I heard Councilmember Willetts.
And Nikki, you're probably going to answer this. You've heard me say this before. I'm really interested in how we promote self-sufficiency. And I'm not sure what words we use because I want to make sure we're all level setting our language, but what can we do to help folks get self-sufficient so they don't end up back on the streets? So that our investment is actually having an effect. So you're probably going to answer that though. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioner, Councilmember. Thank you. I think that is an important comment. And I think that as we think about that sort of broad spectrum of housing need, to recognize that it's a broad spectrum, that we need to have different kinds of options in our community. When we talk about permanent supportive housing, part of what we're talking about is that it isn't time limited. Sometimes temporary or transitional housing, the way that it's been defined has been, for example, it's a limit of 2 years, and it's a hard limit that after 2 years, you need to move on, and it is what it is. And the data around that type of hard limit on when a family needs to move on demonstrates that 2 years is, for one, an arbitrary number, and that frequently it's not enough time for households to make the transition into self-sufficiency. And so there's been a shift toward a model that doesn't have that kind of 2-year hard deadline. If you think, I think particularly about a housing market like ours, a family could make incredible strides in terms of in terms of their recovery, in terms of having additional income, could make incredible strides in 2 years and still be not able to compete in our market. There are many people with far fewer challenges who struggle to compete in our market. And so saying, okay, it's been 2 years, it's time to move on, but to what is certainly a challenge. And so I think that your comments are really important for us to be holding as part of the conversation that we do. I mean, in an ideal world, we want a market that works for everyone, right? Like that would be if the housing market had these kinds of options for everyone and made it possible for everyone to be, successfully housed without any kind of subsidy, that'd be great. We could spend this money on other things. But with the realities of our market today, there is this incredible gap for folks who, as I said, may have made very significant strides, but just aren't able to compete. And so when we think about the kinds of services that are available in permanent supportive housing to move folks towards self-sufficiency, the case management that I mentioned earlier, the counseling, also employment readiness type services to try to, as you said, Councilmember Willetts, to foster self-sufficiency to the greatest degree possible for every household, for every person, so that they're able to avail themselves of all of the options in that rainbow from the previous slide, and so that more doors are open versus just the ones that we're focused on creating in those sort of segments on the far left of the graphic. I've got the graphic in my brain, so. But again, I do think that your comments are well taken and that it's an important element of the conversation.
We've got just a couple minutes. Would anybody else like to jump in?
I'll jump in for just a moment. We're appreciative of the discussion, and I think our staffs have been working well together to sort of flesh some of this stuff out that can bring back to us. But at the outset, we have $4.9 million. We're willing to commit to some form of a partnership, and we were initially hoping we could do it at Allenbaugh House, but unless you can figure out a way to hyperspeed the process, we won't be able to do that. But transition is a very important matter. And if we have staff, we have that money will be available soon. And we'd like to work with a partnership if we can.
Well, do we have a plan for you?
Okay.
No, it's a couple things. I appreciate that. And I think that's really exciting and really helpful to know that the interest that and kind of focus that the county commissioners want to have, the fact that you're willing to invest $4.9 million. And then, of course, we should ask our staffs to drill deeper into the strategy and plans that we've developed and see where that overlap exists. I know that there is, while it might be that Allenbaugh House timing doesn't work for those funds, I would expect that our staff is able to work out a way that the county's investment can be helpful at a time that makes sense for the ERAP funds, that helps us then reduce some need immediately, where we might be able to then be more helpful at a different timeline for Allenbaugh, for instance.
Sure.
And so a couple things I'd like, I feel as though we made some progress here. The long-term solution work is where I hear that both entities, agencies want to work together. And so there's that for our staff to work on. I'd like to follow up, as we talk about, and Nikki brought up, both long-term solutions and the short-term emergency solutions. And as Councilmember Willits brought up, families, I'd like to follow up, just perhaps the two of us, but then bring it to the council and commission on an ask related to helping us bridge the time for the families that are in the hotel right now as we come up with those long-term solutions to get folks into self-sufficiency. So in my mind, I see coming back to have a conversation between the two agencies about that ask that we made to help us bridge families, while our team is looking at building out partnerships to provide housing and self-sufficiencies for families that are currently in hotels, so they don't have to revert back to shelter. And then our staff would also work together, I'd propose, based on what we're hearing, on figuring out where those areas of alignment are, so that county and city resources can be invested in a smart way to reach our long-term goals of affordable housing and housing self-sufficiency for families and others in our community.
Okay. I might add that there is another source we haven't talked about. Last year, the governor set aside $50 million for gap financing. There's still about $25 million of that left over. I don't know if you knew that or not, but through the Idaho Housing and Finance Association, because they processed a number of applications, but they still have at least 20 million for sure that they haven't allocated.
Yep. So just to wrap, being mindful of time on the first, you could say here, but on the first topic, the river, our staff is going to work together to look at joint funding models that both then the commission and the council would consider together. Our staff will work together and we'll kind of take Doug's lead on what a Ridge to Rivers type partnership for river management and oversight and use would look like. And then from the housing perspective, our teams will look at where there's crossover and alignment with regard to interest in investing in long-term solutions for housing. And then I'm going to revisit with you the ask and the conversation about keeping these the families that are currently experiencing homelessness but have been housed in hotels as family units housed, while the city and county work on timeline and needs to meet the number of homes needed for these families that are there now.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right.
All right.
Thank you all very much. We have to adjourn.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
We are adjourned.
All right. You get to do
Yes.
it so much more easy. It's so
Yes,
much
we do.
easier.